I've been thinking about the whole work ethic thing, and I remembered a poem that I have in a book that I read a long time ago. This book is 20 years old now, 21, I think, written by Patrick Lane, called Go Leaving Strange, if you're interested. It's Harbour Press. And I got to know Patrick Lane while I was a student, and I met him several times. I attended lectures of his, to which I saved all the notes in my books. And he was an interesting fellow. Unfortunately, he passed away, but this poem really makes me think of how in the past, I spoke of my grandfather in my last video, and this poem called The War is all about that experience of being with a man like that while he might be recounting a difficult event from the war, and how that impacts the present, and how younger men were influenced by these others who saw atrocity, and yet were not shown how to process it. So they tended to turn, I think, to work for a sense of normalcy. And that's why I feel that people who were hard workers, had the bootstrap mentality, it was a way of coping with what they saw and just getting on with it. That's what I think happens. And we just get stuck in survival mode, and that gets passed on through generations. I know I've spent all my life, until exceptionally recently, in that survival mode. That was what I was taught was normal. And I think that's endemic in the way men especially are socialized. So this poem is really, really great. It's a long-lined poem. It's verse, but it is not a prose poem, although it might sound and feel like one. So it does a fantastic job of achieving the torment of such an experience, and why I feel working was always seen as a welcome distraction. Because when you're stuck with some difficult memories and you don't know how to process them, and the only thing you know how to do is go over them and go over them and go over them, it is a torment that does not stop. And that's unfortunately where people do get stuck, and they don't know how to heal from something. So, The War. Afternoon, and the heat upon the table slipped across the Melmac plates, and the steel knives and the butter, melted from the plastic saucer, slipped to the edge of the scarred pine table and sank to the linoleum. Heat, like the pale water you see on desert roads ahead of you, the shimmer and the mirage of a lake reflected from the bellies of clouds. You drive through thirsty, the wheel wet under your palms. Before us, water glasses beaded from the sweat of air when the cold meets it. The homemade beer, thin with foam. He lived above Swan Lake and made pottery there, celadon and slip glazes drawn from the yellow clay cliffs, Temoku, the rabbit's fur black running down, feldspar, iron, copper, and the ashes from bones, calcium and phosphorus, ball clays and kaolin, all for his huge hands to make into the empty containers others filled with flowers, the vitrified glass, what he was proud of, a frail red rising out of a deeper brown, the black, the impurities, the polluting elements, and the beauty of his making. He was German, come over after the war, and the same age as me. His parents dead, I think, or if not dead, then never spoken of. His hand reached through the air for bread, broke off the crust at the end, and then he ate it slowly between sips of beer. We talked the way men talked back then when they spoke of the past, a privacy only spoken to wives and rarely then. The older days best kept where they were in the locked leather satchel of the heart. His was a long story that came slowly out of silence and told without his eyes looking at me, but staring instead out the window at the stubborn apples ripening, a pale brush of fire flaring under the hard green. Summer in the Okanagan. The heat and a single fly he caught in the middle of the telling, his one hand holding what was left of the bread and his other, the left one, coming behind the fly and then sweeping slowly, catching the fly as it rose backwards, as flies do when they first lift from what they rest on. Bread, the crumbs fallen on the slick surface of the table, a lick of wet butter. He held his fist to my ear so I could hear the buzzing, and then flung the fly to the floor, the single sharp click of its body breaking there. And the story going on, the fly an interruption he seemed unaware of, except for the holding it to my ear, to hear its frantic wings, its sharp death, and the bread almost gone. I spoke of the war and how it had shaped who I was. The years forming me had told him of my childhood and my father gone to fight in Europe, and of my playing what we called as children, war. How we would choose sides, the smallest kids, the enemy, the Germans, and how we would come down on them with our wooden rifles made from broken apple boxes and bayonet them where they lay exposed, choosing to ignore their cries of, "It's not fair." We pushed the thin blades of our rifles into their soft bellies, their shouts and cries meaning nothing to us, and then the tears, shameless little kids, broken in the shallow trenches we had made in the clay hills, imagining what our fathers did each day in the pure glory they never spoke of afterward, no matter our begging. And his story, that he watched his father and uncle come home to their farm in the Black Forest, the horses pulling the short wagon in the night, nostrils breathing mist in the cold, the wagon piled with straw, and the bodies of children under the straw. That they had hunted them down in the forest, children, run from the gathering of Jews and gypsies, tattered clothes and rags wrapped around their feet. He remembered the small feet hanging from the back of the wagon, the rags like torn flags fluttering. His father and uncle had lifted the bodies one by one and fed them into the grinders with dry corn and rotting turnips and blackened potatoes, the pigs clambering over each other and screaming. His mother had found him watching and carried him back into the house, swore him to silence, said what he said and said again, and he had not spoken of it these past 30 years, and why he spoke of it now he did not know, but that I had asked him of the war and of children playing, and that he had played too, but what games they were he didn't remember. It was so long ago, those years, that war. But what he remembered most were the feet sticking out from under the straw, the horse's heavy breathing, the rags fluttering, and his father sitting beside his uncle, tired, staring into the dark barn, and the wagon pulling heavy through the ruts, and the rags wrapped around the feet sticking out from the straw, and the rags fluttering. That He remembered that. In the desert hills, the ponderosa pines have grown 300 years among blue bunch wheatgrass and cheatgrass and rough fescue, and there are prickly pear cactus in spring whose flowers are made one each day. And among the grasses are rabbit brush and sagebrush and antelope brush, where the mountain bluebird is a startled eye, the grasshopper, sparrow, and the sage thrasher, and the wood mouse and the harvest mouse, and the kangaroo rats who come out at night to feed on seeds and moths. There are these things, and they are rare now, and not to be seen except for the careful looking in what little is left of that desert place. And I list them here in a kind of breathing: the vesper sparrow, the saw-whet owl, and the western meadowlark, and the northern scorpion, and the western rattlesnake, now almost gone. The last of them slipped away into what I remember of that time when I lived among them. I name only what I can: my friend, the potter who lived above Swan Lake, who made pottery from kaolin and ball clay and the glazes from the yellow clay of the hills, and who was but a child in that war. Almost no one remembers now. The warriors dead, and the people dead, the men and women dead, and the children dead, and the children of those warriors and those people who remember are now fewer than they were, and that is how it is now. Sage thrasher, wood mouse, western meadowlark, and saw-whet owl, and the meadowlark, and the vesper sparrow, and rough fescue. And I must tell you, so you understand, that we sat there at that table with cold glasses of beer and the remains of the bread we ate together, and he showed me how to cup my hand and come up slowly behind a resting fly, and then sweep my hand through the air, perhaps 2 inches from the tabletop. The fly who lifts backwards when he flees, caught in my fist, and then flinging it to the floor, the click of its body breaking there. And that I learned how to do that, and it was important. I knew what I was learning, though it was only a kind of game between 2 men killing flies. And then we went outside under the weight of the heavy sun and talked a moment. And he did not speak of his crying at the table, and I did not speak of it, for we were men of that time, and we had learned long ago not to speak of tears and of the stories that bring them, and that in this only world there are things that must be remembered, and that they be spoken of. Scarlet Gelia, parsnip-flowered buckwheat, white-tailed jackrabbits and balsam root, and the rare sagebrush mariposa, and all such things that are almost gone, and that I can still catch a fly the way he taught me, and that we stood there by his truck in the dust and the heat and said nothing to each other, only stared out into the orchards and the green apples ripening there. And then he was gone into the desert, and I can tell you only this of what I remember of that time. This kind of experience is rare for, I think, people nowadays of experiencing that, but I have experienced it even though I'm rather young, and that's why I compare it to survival mode and why the whole bootstrap thing came to be, I feel, what it is. And that is a way of keeping us in survival mode and keeping us doing all that really hard work. it also provides a place to be distracted from horror sometimes. So, I feel like I've said a lot of stuff, and I got to read a really nice long poem. It was fun to do that with you. I hope that you enjoyed it. I don't know if this book is still in print, but if you're interested in this kind of thing, I think of Patrick Lane as a very masculine writer. He writes about this kind of stuff, or wrote, I should say, about this kind of stuff a lot. And if you are less of a poetry reader and more of like a memoir reader, I would definitely recommend his memoir that came out, I think, in about 2007 now, called There Is a Season. I have a copy. I feel compelled to get it. Just a minute. We're on the other side of the room. You never get to see this side of the room, so here's my bookshelf. There Is a Season. I see I have a bookmark in it, but there's his signature. He signed it for me one day when I went to a lecture he gave at university. And yeah, he signed it with my fountain pen that I gave him to use. That's the thing. If you can form relationships with the people who write the books, man, does that help sort of really, really flesh out the book and the experience of reading it, you know? Anyway, I do digress. I thank you for watching all of this, and if you've enjoyed it, please do let me know. That would be great. It was fun to talk about these kinds of things with you in this way. So, I will see you next time.